At this point in time, Flashpoint has 4 expansions, plus a PDF of various scenarios and a whole bunch of promos and extra figures and components for the game. This review is going to look at the differences between those different expansions and consider which expansion you might want to go for if you enjoy the base game, but you're looking for a little bit more content or perhaps a little bit more variety or maybe a little bit more challenge, and I'll try and look at it from those 3 different perspectives. At the moment, we have the Flashpoint Fire Rescue base box. The Extreme Danger is the only boxed expansion, with a box the same size as Flashpoint itself, and then I keep the components in a pretty packed case like this. So we don't yet have a solution which will contain everything, although if you bagged these up, they will probably fit in these boxes, because this box in particular is not yet full with all the boards. Well, most of the boards being kept in here and only 1 or 2 being kept in this box. I'll talk you through what the different boards look like and what the components are which come with each expansion. As you are no doubt aware, the base game comes with a double-sided board, one side being a single-storey house, and the other side, which is slightly more challenging, but not noticeably so really, being a beach house with this central sort of open plan area where fire can spread more easily for a bit of variety. These are probably still the 2 simplest boards to play in the complete set, so they're probably the easiest. Now, my base set, when I got it, came with firefighters that looked like this, so they were little pawns. These, I think, have been upgraded in more recent editions of the game with these plastic coloured firefighters like this in every different colour. In between the pawns and these, there was a stage where people were getting these Kickstarter promo exclusives, which are these wooden firefighters like this, which are still very nice pieces. Later expansions upgrade the pieces again, so that we now have 4 different sets of firefighters depending on which edition of the game and which expansions you have, and I'll show you those later figures when we talk about the other expansions. So that's the base game. The next thing that came out was, as I say, a PDF of scenarios called Fire Academy Challenge or something like that. For me, that's not a particularly inviting prospect playing that, although I have that PDF. It involves a lot of bookkeeping and setup on the board, and I would rather play the boards as they arise, particularly now that we've got a bunch of different expansions that provide us different scenarios anyway. So that's the base game. The first true expansion for Flashpoint Fire Rescue was Urban Structures, which was not a boxed expansion, but it introduced this new double-sided board and a new rule set. And this double-sided board on the one side had more apartments similar to what we've seen before, except that this time it's a sort of terrace, so you can't get around the sides and you can't gain access through the sides of the building because there's more apartments alongside, and you can't get access from here into here without chopping through these walls that run down the middle. So this is a simple modification of what we've seen on the earlier boards. The other side is a little bit more different to what we've seen before, and introduces a whole host of new rules, because this is a high-rise building, and the only way that we're going to gain access into here is either by coming up in these elevators, which we do by opening and closing the doors. That represents coming up into the upstairs lobby and being on the ground floor, from which we can move into the engine spaces here and here. Or the alternative is to use ladders to get through broken walls. So if there's damage to the walls, we can then use a ladder which would go from the engine to come up into here. Now, this ladder is not depicted by any particular token. It's simply part of the rule set, and that has been modified in later expansions with the introduction of hydraulic platforms and that sort of thing, which might make this particular rule slightly odd feeling, having played the later expansions. The other thing that is notable in here is that there are no windows like in the base game, and again those are introduced in later expansions, and so again it can feel a little strange playing this board having played previous ones where there are a lot of windows. We've also got these light walls which only take one chop to get through, so they're new, and lots of little rooms. So this board quickly fills up with damage cubes. So you're going to find this board will collapse a lot, that the building will collapse because you'll get too many damage cubes on it, which makes it one of the most difficult boards to play in the set so far. Now this has necessitated the introduction of a new role, which is really good actually, really nice new role, a structural engineer who can remove hotspots and can remove damage markers. So you get this card with the expansion, and that's a really nice touch. So that's the Urban Structures expansion. The other thing that comes with this particular expansion is a whole set of new scenarios and sort of variant rules down here, which are quite fun to play through. Things like, if your firefighter is knocked down, it gives you rules about having to rescue the firefighter, rather than just the straightforward firefighter transporting to the ambulance magically, which is what happens when you play with any of the other sets or any of the other rule sets. So that's the Urban Structures expansion. The second expansion for Flashpoint Fire Rescue is, again, not a boxed expansion, but it's a very logical progression for the series, because now we introduce literally a second story to the game, and the expansion is called Flashpoint Fire Rescue Second Story. So this side of the board, it's now split into two, with an upstairs and a downstairs, and this side is marked A. This is the villa board, and the villa has quite an open plan upstairs. Again, it's got some of these light blue walls which only take one chop that we've seen before in Urban Structures, but it's also got windows which can be opened, and it comes with window markers to open these, and those walls can be blown through with one chop as well. Now these open windows can give access from the lower floors, which you can gain by using portable ladders, which there are 4 kept on the engine, so these come with the game as well, these little portable ladder tokens. When you're using one of these, you would place one on the ground floor where you're gaining the access from, and then one on the upper floor here, and now your firefighter can move from there up into there and go in through open windows or through destroyed walls. So this upper floor gives you a whole other aspect to the gameplay. There's also a staircase in here, so there's a staircase space here, and you can move from here to up here as if those spaces were adjacent, and then move around as required. There are rules for using all these things, so to explain how these portable ladders work and different number of action points to use them and all that sort of thing. There are also another bunch of nice components in this set. We have an explosion marker, which may initially seem a little pointless because we're placing fire on the board anyway, but sometimes when these explosions really start setting off all over the board, it's nice to be able to just go, okay, this is where the explosion started, so then you know what you're putting around it and you don't lose track of where it originated from. So that's a useful little marker. But even more essential than that, we get a whole bunch of these action point markers, which are this dark green on one side and a pale green on the other. Now these are used to mark when you've taken your actions. So say you had 3 action points available to your character. Each time he uses one, you flip one over so that you can keep track of the fact that he's used an action, he's used another action, and then another. And even better than that, we now have individual action point tokens for the individual characters. So this is the firefighter, I've got him in a little sleeve here, and he's got these tokens which are specific to him. Same for the fire captain with his 2 extra command AP. Same for the paramedic, her 3 treatment markers so that she can place these on victims and show that they've been treated. We've also got some for the rescue specialist here. They've got their own movement markers which are a different colour. So that's very good addition to the game, very useful. In fact, it almost, I would say, essential, and a good reason to pick up this expansion just for that alone. These markers from the original set now just become for saved AP, so we can take these when we've saved AP to remind us, and they look very different to our standard AP markers. So that's a really nice touch. You get some good components with the second story expansion. On the other side of the board, we've got the B side of the board, which is a hotel. So if we turn it over, now the hotel clearly has many more rooms in it and many more of these light walls, which means fire is not going to spread so rapidly, but you're going to get a lot more damage cubes on here and the building is more likely to collapse in the same way that that high-rise section of the urban structures expansion can quickly collect a whole load of damage tokens. I would say the second story expansion is probably the next step in terms of complexity and difficulty to the base game. So if you're going for difficulty, I would say base game is your starting point, second story then flipping over to the hotel to make it slightly more difficult again. And I think that's the natural progression, and then urban structures would be more difficult again. Although that terraced sort of side of the board with the different apartments, maybe that's not as tricky as the harder side of the second story expansion. Our third proper expansion for Flashpoint is the Extreme Danger expansion, and this is perhaps the most exciting expansion yet. The reason being it comes with fantastic components and it comes in a box, so this is a proper boxed expansion. We've got a double-sided board here, full-size board, and a half-size board here, which represents the basement on one side and a loft on the other. Now that board, the basement and loft, can be added to the second story expansion to give an extra level again, or it can be added to the base game, or it can be played with either side of this board. So it opens up a whole load of new possibilities for playing the game. This is the basement. So you can't get out of the basement through the walls, and these can take any number of damage tokens on them. You can only get up through the fire, through the staircase here, which means that when this fills up with fire, it can become really claustrophobic because you've got to get through that fire in order to get people up this staircase. It's a really challenging little board, adds a lot to the game. I think this is great. It's great fun playing with the basement and very challenging. On the reverse of that board, you've got the attic, which works similarly to the second story expansion. We can go up through windows or damaged walls. On this side of the board, we've got this sort of outside sort of balcony area where you can come up and come through these doors. We've got quite open plan up here, which means that fire is going to spread quickly. Now looking at the main board, here we have a garage setup. Again, big wide area, which means that fire is going to spread quickly, and then a lot of smaller rooms around here. Now you'll notice there are green doors on here, which represent fire doors, and we have a whole load of extra tokens in this expansion. So fire doors can be opened and closed like normal doors, but if an explosion goes off next to them, then they can jam. So you put a jammed token on, or they can jam multiple times, in which case you place another one. You'd have to chop this door in order to get rid of the jam tokens before you're able to then open it. So these are a nice touch, a simple rule set, makes a lot of sense and adds a lot to the game. The other things that feature in this expansion are these little explosives. So this is a small explosive. You put 4 cubes on here with explosions going on it. If this takes 4 damage, it's going to explode. It'll explode once and then it'll explode again, and hence causing quite a lot of damage around it. On the reverse of that, there's these canisters of toxic waste. When they get 4 cubes on them, they start to spill this toxic waste with these other tokens around, which will randomly spread around the area and kill anybody that's in that space, and only the hazmat technician can get rid of these. So they're a really nice little touch as well. There's also a very large explosive, which I've got in my set here. So this is the really large set of explosive. If this gets 4 cubes on it, it's going to explode in all directions. And similarly, there's a car here which does exactly the same thing, explodes in all different directions if you get 4 cubes on it, so that'll sit in the garage space there. The reverse of this board is a laboratory, which works in similar ways. In terms of the explosives, you can put explosives on it and that sort of thing. But this has got a ground floor and an upper floor, so we've got the stairs here in order to arrive up here. Lots of imagery of canisters and explosives, but again, these work in exactly the same way as on the other levels. You can move over these freely, but you place the explosive tokens in there wherever you want in order to make the game more or less difficult. And this again can be played with the loft in the attic in play or with the basement in play, and it makes for a very challenging board with all the explosives on there. Lots of variety in this expansion, lots of different ways to put things together. And it also introduces these little figures, which are different for every different specialist. So these are lovely, these figures, they're fantastic. So we've got all the different specialists, and the back of the box tells us which specialist each of them is. These are great figures. This really adds theme to the game. And a promo that came with the Kickstarter, I don't know how readily available these will be, are these little clip-on bases which give you different colours for the different firefighters so that you can keep track of which one you're playing as. So they're a really nice touch as well. There are a whole host of other promos that also came with this Kickstarter set, and I'll talk through those in a little bit. The other thing I should mention with the basement board, which we haven't covered yet, is that when explosions happen in this basement, so if an explosion happens here, then that is going to be reflected with some cracked floor markers on this board here. So these floors can eventually, if there's another explosion immediately below, this will turn into a hole that you can't go through, so you can't move through this space. You'll also remove 2 damage markers from the game, so it brings the whole building closer to collapse. Now you can get up and down through these spaces with portable ladders, so you could use a portable ladder to go down a level into the basement, or you could use a ladder to climb over the hole in the floor. So the Extreme Danger expansion does come with more of these portable ladders. It also comes with a bunch of these windows as well, which we've seen in the previous expansions. You also get a little staircase set, which you can add on to other boards in order to gain access to the basement or to the attic. And then this hydraulic platform, which is an excellent little addition to the game. So the hydraulic platform moves from the engine. So if you have your fire engine here, the hydraulic platform can be used by anybody, but particularly good the deck gun operator. He can move this up to anywhere on the upper level on that side of the board, the same side as the engine, and then move through windows or move through damaged walls. You can also squirt a hose from here, clearing fire in all adjacent spaces. So this is an alternative to the deck gun as well. That's a really nice touch to the game, and for me pretty much replaces the rules about using ladders from the engine in the high-rise building. I would use this instead because it's a much simpler and more logical sort of rule set. When using with the basement or the attic, you now need a 12-sided dice because we've got additional spaces. So the 12-sided dice is included, so you use that in combination with your red dice instead of the original 8-sided dice. I'll quickly look at some of the promos that came with the game. So you have things like a heavy guy who takes extra AP to carry. He's a promo, I don't know how readily available he'll be. Similarly with this guy, he's on an oxygen tank, so if you're carrying him and he explodes, fire gets on him, he explodes, he doesn't just die. We also have a goldfish in a bowl, which is just similar to your cat and dog. We've also got a ferret there, no special rules for them. We've got these guys with black crosses, which means that they're seriously injured, so they can't be carried until they've been treated by the medic. We've got the guys with the red crosses, which means they've all effectively, they haven't been injured, so they can just follow you out the building without needing to be carried. And then we have these doors, which turn out to be locked when you try and open them. So that's a really nice touch as well. There's also hazmats, which are hidden. So you think it's going to be just a normal point of interest, and then when you turn it over, it turns out to be a hazmat. I'm trying to find you one of those now. Here it is. So yeah, normal point of interest, turn it over, it turns out it's a hazmat, and various others of these red and black crosses. And finally, there's these realistic victim tokens, which I personally don't use because I prefer the faceless sort of artwork, but these are also promo items. I don't know how readily available these are going to be. Okay, and that is the Extreme Danger expansion. Finally then, we have our fourth expansion, which is the Dangerous Waters expansion. At the moment, I think this is not going to be available for some time. I know Extreme Danger has just come out, but I think Dangerous Waters has been released early to Kickstarter backers, but won't be available for some time after the others. Now, Dangerous Waters is probably the most different from the other expansions so far. It takes place on a ship on one side of the board. So on the ship is going to sink if you get 4 damage cubes on this central engine. But we also have this green area around here, which is called the bulkhead. Okay, so this cannot be chopped through, and explosions cannot damage it either. However, heat can pass through it. So if we have an explosion in a space like this, then you will get smoke on the other side, and that can later ignite clearly. So fire can spread through this wall, but it's quite difficult to do so. We've got this nice big corridor running all the way around, so access is quite easy around here. And then this central area, we're going to want to protect this. But then we've got a bunch of these smaller rooms up here where damage cubes can get loaded up. The outside walls cannot be blown up, so you can get many, many damage cubes on those. And eventually, once you run out of damage cubes, the whole thing sinks. We've got 4 different spaces where the firefighters can begin. So in each corner, they can begin here. And this is where we're going to try and take the victims to as well. Now, this board also features the green fire doors, which we've mentioned previously in the Extreme Danger expansion, and these come with the set, along with the associated jammed markers. But they're the only components that come with it. On the reverse of the board, we have a submarine. Now, the ship is difficult, but the submarine is extremely challenging. And it goes together like this. So it goes together lengthways, which again is a big departure from previous expansions in this game. So now when we're rolling this red dice, we could get any number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we got 6, we're now looking at this portion of the board, whereas 1 to 3, we're looking at this portion of the board. And then the black dice will be the 8-sided dice. We don't use the 12-sided dice from Extreme Danger. And we can have 1 to 8, and then we get 1 to 8 again on the other portion of the board. The firefighters will enter through this central space, and when victims are rescued, they're going to need to be taken to this area here or the similar area up here. They don't get taken off the board, which means that they can still be blown up. They are protected by a bulkhead, again like in the ship, this green line where heat can transfer through. They're only killed if both sections here end up on fire. Then all the people who are collected in there are going to die, and that's probably going to lead to you losing the game. Again, the outside walls can't be breached, but they can collect many, many damage cubes. If you get 4 damage cubes on the engine, then the whole thing has failed. If you get 3 damage cubes on this computer here, or this navigation table, then the whole thing fails. 3 damage cubes up here on this computer system, the whole thing fails, and so on and so forth. So the firefighters are going to be coming through here. If they get blown up, they're going to be knocked back to there. The whole thing is a nightmare. It's really, really tough to beat. It's fun to play, but it is a tough board to beat. And so I think this is the most challenging of all the Flashpoint expansions so far, more so than the High Rise in the Urban Structures expansion. I would say this is not the first expansion to go for if you're new to the game, or if you're just looking for your first expansion. But if you're looking for something really different and something really challenging, then Dangerous Waters is probably the one to go for. It occurs to me at this point that there's 2 promos that I haven't mentioned yet, and I believe these are going to be available for sale separately to the others. And those are 2 new characters. Now, I already mentioned that we had a structural engineer introduced in the Urban Structures expansion. He gained a figure along with all the other figures in the Extreme Danger expansion, although you don't get the card for him in the Extreme Danger expansion. So I'm trying to find his figure now. In fact, this is it. So here's the structural engineer. So this figure comes in Extreme Danger. Okay. Now, the promo cards are a rescue dog, which is a fantastic little character. So the rescue dog comes with a miniature. He's got 12 AP, so he can run a long way around. He can't do very much. He can't go through fire. He can't open doors. He can't drive vehicles or anything like that, but he can drag victims. It costs him a lot to do it though. It's 4 AP to drag a victim, and he can reveal victims. So he is useful when used in conjunction with other players who can open doors or put out fires for him. And then we have the veteran character. The veteran is he's able to dodge using saved AP, so if he's going to be knocked down he can jump out of the way. You can also give other firefighters that same ability to dodge if they're close to him, and they also gain 1 AP for being within 3 spaces of him pretty much at any point in their turn. So the veteran is another useful character. These two, I think you're going to have to buy them separately to use them in the game, but they came as a Kickstarter promo at the moment. While I've still got this board out, one thing I should mention is one of the reasons it's so difficult is because we can't use the deck gun operator here. We obviously can't have an engine going around the edge squirting water in and sorting out the fire. The same on a ship. So that makes a big difference to the game, makes it much more difficult. I haven't quite worked out a way around that yet in my own sort of strategizing for these boards. But I guess it's a more heavy use of the generalist and the CAF's firefighter. Those are going to be much more useful characters in these boards than perhaps I haven't used them so heavily in the other boards. Final thoughts on all of this then. I would say that if you're looking for components, the best expansions are, well, the Extreme Danger expansion is fantastic, full of components, but Second Story is pretty good for components too. It's got lots of useful tokens that you're going to want in the game. Urban Structures gives you that extra specialist, which is really useful, but it is a tough board. If you're looking for challenge, you want the High Rise from the Urban Structures board, or you want this submarine board, so you want the Dangerous Waters expansion. The promos add a lot to the game, so those little extra victims who with different characteristics, they really do start to make the game tell a story and start to give you real decisions about which of these victims am I going to save? Do I save the heavy guy who's going to take me extra movement to get out? Or do I save the guy who's going to explode on that oxygen tank? Do I leave them behind? So there's real ethical dilemmas that start to arise, and I think it's nice that the game can simulate that. Second Story expansion is a sort of probably the easiest expansion. It's not as easy as the base game, but it's a nice progression from the base game. So if you're just looking for something simple to add to the game and take that next step, I think Second Story is the one to go for. But for real variety, Extreme Danger adds in that loft and basement board, which gives you a whole load of new combinations of board layouts. So that's the one to go for variety. But for a completely unique experience, Dangerous Waters is the way to go. So I can't tell you which is the best expansion. They're all good. They all work well. Each additional expansion has showed an evolution of the game. So the game has got that bit better, that bit more realistic, and some of them feel like they've superseded the others, the previous ones. That hydraulic platform in the Extreme Danger expansion slightly, it improves on the urban structures method of having a ladder to go through damaged walls. The windows that have been added in since Second Story are a really good addition to the game, and looking back, you start to question why they weren't there from the beginning, but it's easy to say that with hindsight. So each of the newer boards seems to improve on the game. That doesn't mean that you won't have fun with the previous expansions. I'm sure you will. But it's going to be your own personal choice, really, which way you want to go. Challenge, components, or sort of variety of play are going to be the key decisions you're going to have to make there.